Hi, I'm Cindy Cloward, and I'm going to show you today how to finish this pillow with binding. So this is not your typical way to finish a pillow. Generally, you put your pieces together and then you flip inside out and you have a finished pillow. This time, we're going to show you how to finish the pillow with binding, kind of like when you quilt. Now, when you look at this, this is actually an extra quilt block that I had, and I didn't make it into the quilt, so I wanted to put it into a pillow. And I love a nice binding, so I'm going to show you how to bind this like you would a quilt, and then you just add your pillow form, and it looks great. It's just, the binding just kind of frames this quilt block. So I've already added my pieces for the envelope where the pillow form goes in, and they overlap, and I've basted around this block, and now I'm ready to go to the binding. Now, I like to choose a binding that has good contrast with the base fabric and kind of frames your quilt block or whatever you're showing for your pillow. So typically, you cut your binding on the bias because the threads run across this direction and it gives strength to the binding. So if there's a lot of wear and tear on the item that you've made, a beloved quilt or pillow, you're going to get more wear out of binding cut on the bias than cross grain. But along with cutting it on the bias, you get a lot of stretch, so you do have to be careful with that. If it is an item that is not going to be used a lot, maybe it's a wall hanging quilt or it's a decorative pillow, then it's really easy to cut cross grain. When you're cutting that on the bias, it is a 45-degree angle, and so you get a lot of stretch. Cross grain, which is selvage to selvage, you do get a little stretch, but it's not as much, and it's really easy to use on cross grain. Today, I'm going to cut my binding cross grain, which is selvage to selvage. Now, I like a tight binding, so I do 2 inches. So you're going to take your ruler and your mat and your rotary cutter, and you're going to line 2 inches along here. And I'm only going to need 2 strips to make my binding. And I'll fold this up and save the rest of it for later. And I've got my 2 2-inch strips, and we're going to need to join these strips for the binding. So the first thing I do is I'm cutting off the selvage. Those are my extra pieces. I don't need any more. And now we're going to create 1 long strip. Now, when you've got your binding, you don't just put it right sides together and sew across, because then you've got a big bulk of fabric. So you want to spread out that seam, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you've got 1 piece here, and you've got 1 piece here. This is the time you need your pins. I'm going to mark it here. And we're going to make 1 continuous piece. So you're going to check yourself. And I'm going to stitch. You've got your you've crossed it right here. I'm going to stitch from this V to this V. This little cleavage mark and this little cleavage mark right across there. Now, if you are worried about your stitch line, it's a good time to get out your pencil and just mark it. If you get comfortable with sewing on your own, you don't have to mark it anymore, but sometimes it's nice when you're a beginner to mark it. So just check yourself 1 more time before you take it to the machine and flip it over. Does that go in the same direction as the other piece of fabric, and is it a continuous piece? Yes, it is. So we're ready to take it to the machine and sew. Okay, so before I cut anything, I recheck, make sure it was sewn the right direction, and it was. So I can cut these tails off, just like this. That's why I love this little tool right here, because I can use it to cut, like this. You can finger press it. I do sometimes just take my little snips, snip that off, snip those two sides off. Now it's ready to take to the machine, and the first thing are to the iron and press. First, let's open up our seams. I'm pressing, not ironing. And then we're going to start from the end, and we're going to make sure our edges touch. And this is when I like to use a little best press, get it slightly dampened, and that starch in there just works to keep it right where you want it to be. We're moving this forward. Making sure our edges are all touching. Giving it a really good press. Now see the seams. Why you cut it on this angle is because then the seams spread out and it's not doubled on itself. And you don't have the bulk. Okay, we've finished our binding, and now we're going to pin it to our project. Now, I love to hand bind. I think you get a really nice result. And so when you hand bind, you're going to sew your binding to the front of your project, and then you roll it over and you hand bind in the back. Now, if you want to machine bind your entire project, I like to have more control and see where the stitches are going, and I would choose to put the binding to the back and roll it to the front. So today, since we're not doing that, I'm going to start on the side, and I'm going to line up the edge of my binding. Of course, we're doing the folded edge out, and the raw edge is on the raw edge of your project. Now the rest I'm going to take to the machine, because this is how you're going to sew your binding on. You're going to come all the way, and this is where this comes in handy. You're going to stitch. I like to use my 1/4 inch seam guide, and you come all the way down, and I'm going to mark it 1/4 inch from the edge. And I mark it with a pin, and that's where I know to stop my stitches. Once my stitches have been stopped, I'm going to bring it back here and show you how to fold your binding. So let's go sew. And I like to back stitch right there, right on the end, gives a little extra strength. Remove my pin. Now I've sewn that to this point. Again, you're leaving a long tail. I'll show you how to finish your binding later. And you're going to take your binding, and this is how you do your mitered corner. So you're going to fold this over so it matches the exact angle of your corner. You fold it over, and look how that runs the edge along the top of your project, so you know that's correct. I do a little finger press there, then I'm going to flip it over on itself, going the other direction like this. And you make sure your edge is folded over to the edge of your project and not your stitch line. So you can add a pin right there so it doesn't move when you take it back to your machine, and then you're going to remove the pin when you start sewing again. And I like to pin all the way along. It's a good time to check how your first stitches went. Make sure you gathered the top and the bottom, and it looks like I did. So, and you will do that. That'll be accurate if you press this correctly the first time, but it's always good to check as you're going along. Again, I'm going to use my small ruler and measuring a 1/4 inch from the end. It's about right there. That's going to be my stop spot right there. And I'm going to take that to the machine and sew my next stitch. Okay, we're repeating that again. Finger press, make sure it's going the right direction. Flip over on itself. It's going the length of our project. Okay, so I have almost sewn all the way around, but I've left this little opening, and that's so I can join my two ends. So I just, before I do that, I go back and I just check and make sure I got all of my my seams in so I can roll it over, and they're all ready to go. So now I want an invisible seam, so you don't know where I stopped and you don't know where I started. So I'm going to start by crossing these. I'm going to clip one of these ends. So I'm going to clip this end right here. Cross like this. And go like this. And in the middle of this, where's my little, there it is. This is such a handy tool. So I have a 2-inch wide strip of fabric. So I'm going to cross this 2 inches. So I kind of choose a spot right in the middle, and I make a little cut through, and I cut through all layers of fabric like this. I'm showing it on this angle so you can see it a little better. And then I'm going to mark it over here, and that's 2 inches right there. And that's going to be my cutting line for on top. That's my cutting line for bottom. And they're still crossed like that. So now I'm going to join these two edges. So right sides together. I'm going to have to fold this back a little bit. Right sides together. And I'm going to open this up so this, I'm going to see your underside like that. And I'm going to mark it. If you're used to sewing this, you get to the point where you don't need to mark, but it's a good, if you're new to binding, it's great to mark where you're going to stitch. And I'm going to stitch right across there. So I line that up. It's a V. See that V shape? And where you clipped is where you line up your two sides together. It's a little tricky when you're kind of pulling the fabric a little bit. So I'm going to mark that. Normally it's closer to me. This is going to be my stitch line right across there. I'm going to pin it. So it kind of stays put. And you can kind of test it a little bit. Oh, that looks like that's the right way to sew it. Let's take it to the machine and finish up. Okay, we're going to bring this back over and bend it over, and it's like magic. It fits. So then we're confident that we can cut. And so we can give it a quick press because we want our seams open. And then let's finish stitching. Okay, this is ready to roll and hand bind. Now this is the point where I like to use these clips and go around and clip all around. Grab your needle and thread. And I learned this knotting technique from Sue Daly. Find your knot, pull it to the end. Got a good knot on the end. And it doesn't really matter where you start, but hide your stitch or your knot on the inside of your binding. And you're going to go up here, and when you go down you go straight across, and you're going to advance your needle underneath, but make sure you're not going through to the other side of your project. Take little 1/4 inch stitches around, and I love to bind by hand, and I love to just sit in front of the TV or just an evening and sit on the couch and bind a quilt. That's nice when these clips are tacking it down for you. You can just put all your loose threads, tuck them underneath. I'm going to show you how to do your corners when you come up. And tucked underneath.
Yep.
Okay, and this is how I do my edges. Miter your corner, so you have a nice mitered on that side. You're going to do the same over here. So you're going to tuck down in like this. And then you're going to come stitch up between both. I like to just do a couple tacks down like that, holds it in place. Now flip your project, go the other direction. Okay, I'm just finishing my stitches. And I am going to knot off. Do a quick little knot. I'll hide my threads, run it along on the inside of here. Just clip that so it's hidden. And you've finished your binded pillow. We just need a pillow form, and it's ready to put on your bed. And I have a quilt that matches this, so this will be nice to put on a bed and have a matching pillow to go with it. Of course, I like the feather pillows the very best because you can push on them and they fill all the corners. So there, all finished.